Bo tu de va thumbnail. Phuong on de chan. Tuda, my parents stole my custom car for my sister. They regretted it when I had them facing prison. Bo mi dan kap chik say du qua tua cho em gai. Ho de hoi han kai tua tong ho doi mat voyon tu. Thumbnail. While I was finalizing a $50 million deal in London, parents forged my name to pawn my car for sister's business. Mom said, "Family comes first." I replied 5 words, her face fell. Trong Luc Toi Dang Chot Hop Dong 50 True Duo London, Bo Mi Jia Mao Chu Kai De Cam Say Toi Cho Vik Kin Don Qua Em Gai. Minoi Jia Din La Tren Het, Toi Dap Lai 52, Matba I Bien Sak. While I was finalizing a $50 million deal in London, parents forged my name to pawn my car for sister's business. Mom said, "Family comes first." I replied 5 words, her face fell. I am Nora, a 32-year-old senior financial analyst, and I had just done the impossible. When the wheels of my flight touched down at Chicago O'Hare Airport, a wave of pure, unfiltered exhaustion washed over me. My bones ached from sitting in a cramped first-class seat for 9 straight hours, and my mind felt like it had been put through a blender. But beneath the fatigue, there was a steady, quiet pulse of triumph. For the last 6 months, I had practically lived out of a suitcase in London, living on black coffee and 3 hours of sleep a night, negotiating a massive corporate acquisition. It was a $50 million deal. My boss had trusted me to close it, and against all odds, I did. I secured my promotion, my bonus, and a permanent spot at the top of the firm. As I stood by the luggage carousel, waiting for my suitcase, I finally took my phone off airplane mode. It buzzed instantly, flooded with dozens of emails, calendar invites, and texts. Among the notifications, there was a strange, generic automated alert from my car insurance company regarding a change in my coverage status. Honestly, I swiped it away without reading it. I was too tired to deal with administrative glitches, figuring it was just a system error or a reminder to renew my policy. I dragged my heavy suitcase out to the curb, hailed a cab, and headed straight to the rental car agency. I needed a temporary vehicle to get to the suburbs before heading to my downtown apartment. Riding in the back of the cab, watching the gray Chicago skyline roll by through the rain-streaked windows, my mind drifted to the only thing that actually brought me comfort. My custom, vintage black Challenger. It was a beautiful piece of machinery, a classic muscle car with a roaring engine and flawless chrome trim. But it wasn't just a car to me. It was a piece of my history, the only tangible connection I had left to my Grandpa Walter. When I was a little girl, Grandpa Walter used to spend hours in his garage, smelling of peppermint and old motor oil, teaching me about engines. He always told me that cars weren't just metal, they were freedom. When he passed away, he left me a small inheritance, just enough to buy and restore the exact model we used to dream about. Because I lived in a busy downtown area where parking was scarce and street vandalism was common, I kept the Challenger safely stored in my parents' spacious suburban garage. They had a 2-car garage, and since my father parked his truck in the driveway, the second spot was always empty. It felt like the smartest, safest option. I visited the car on weekends, taking it out for long drives on the empty country roads just to clear my head. It was my sanctuary. After the hellish 6 months I had just endured in London, all I wanted was to slide into that leather seat, grip the steering wheel, and listen to the engine roar. That car was my reward. It was the physical proof that all my late nights, all my missed holidays, and all my sacrifices actually meant something. I paid the cab driver, picked up my rental car, and merged onto the highway, heading straight for the suburbs. I had no idea I was driving straight into a nightmare. The drive out to the suburbs took about 45 minutes. The rain had stopped by the time I pulled onto my parents' quiet, tree-lined street. It was the kind of neighborhood where everyone kept their lawns perfectly manicured, and nothing unexpected ever really happened. I parked the rental car by the curb, grabbed my purse, and walked up the familiar concrete driveway. The house was quiet, the porch light flicking on automatically as the evening shadows began to stretch across the yard. I reached into my purse and pulled out the small plastic garage remote. I always liked entering through the garage rather than ringing the front doorbell. It felt more like coming home. I pressed the button, listening to the familiar mechanical hum as the heavy white door slowly rattled upward. I was already smiling, picturing the glossy black paint of my Challenger waiting for me in the dim light. The door locked into place at the top of its tracks. I stepped forward, and my brain completely short-circuited. The space was empty. There was no car. No glossy black paint. No chrome bumpers. Just an empty rectangle of bare, stained concrete. My heart stopped beating for a solid 3 seconds. A cold, suffocating wave of panic rushed over my skin. I literally dropped my keys. They hit the cement with a sharp clatter that echoed in the empty space. I stood frozen, my eyes darting frantically around the garage, as if the car was somehow hiding behind the lawnmower or the garden hoses. Where my Challenger used to be parked, there was now a massive stack of cheap cardboard shipping boxes. They were stacked nearly 5 feet high, plastered with bright pink stickers that read Stella's Secret Cosmetics in a gaudy, cursive font. On the floor, right where my engine block usually rested, there was a small, fresh drip of motor oil. My breathing grew shallow. My first, immediate thought was that someone had broken in. A classic car theft. Someone had bypassed the security system, popped the lock, and driven off with my Grandpa Walter's legacy. But as the initial shock slightly wore off, another, far more sickening realization began to creep into my mind. Car thieves don't neatly stack cardboard boxes of makeup in the exact spot they just stole a vehicle from. Car thieves don't leave the garage door perfectly functioning and the side door locked. I bent down, picking up my keys with a hand that was shaking so violently I could barely grip the metal. I walked past the tower of pink boxes, my high heels clicking against the concrete, and grabbed the doorknob leading into the house. It wasn't locked. I pushed the door open and stepped into the kitchen hallway. My stomach was twisting itself into tight, painful knots. The house smelled like roast chicken and vanilla candles, completely normal, completely domestic. I could hear the murmur of voices coming from the dining room. I didn't take off my coat. I didn't announce I was home. I just walked straight toward the voices, the cold realization settling deep in my bones that the thieves I was looking for weren't strangers at all. They were sitting right inside my own house. I stepped into the dining room. Sitting around the oak table were my mother Martha, my father George, and my 28-year-old sister Stella. They looked up as I entered. They had clearly been waiting for me, positioned around the table like a corporate board of directors preparing for a hostile takeover. Stella was the first thing my eyes locked onto. The golden child of the family. She was sitting back in her chair, wearing a brand new designer blouse and flashing a fresh manicure. My father, George, immediately looked down at his plate, suddenly fascinated by his own hands. He couldn't even make eye contact with me. My mother, Martha, plastered on a sweet, condescending smile that made my blood run instantly cold. "Where's my car?" I asked. My voice didn't shake. It came out deadly quiet, barely above a whisper. Stella rolled her eyes, adjusting a diamond bracelet on her wrist. "Oh, relax, Nora. You're so dramatic. It is just a temporary loan. I needed startup capital for my new cosmetics line. The banks were taking too long with the approval process, and I had suppliers waiting. I am going to pay it all back once the first batch sells out next month." The words hung in the air. A temporary loan. Startup capital. Pay what back? I took a slow step toward the table. "Where is my Challenger?" George finally cleared his throat, though he still refused to look at me. "We took it down to Victor's auto pawn on the east side," he mumbled, his voice thick with shame. "Got $45,000 for it." "Stella needed the money, Nora. You know how hard it is to start a business." The room tilted violently. $45,000. To a pawn shop. They didn't just borrow it for a joyride. They pawned it. "You did what?" I whispered, the sheer audacity of it suffocating me. "You pawned my car?" "The car Grandpa Walter left me." "Now, Nora, do not raise your voice," my mother chimed in, her tone dripping with false patience. "You make plenty of money at your fancy corporate job downtown. You are away in Europe half the year anyway. You hardly even drive that old thing. Your sister has a real dream, and we had to support her. We used the spare key you left in the kitchen drawer and the title you kept in the glove box. My mind spun, piecing it together. The spare key. The title. But wait. A pawn shop wouldn't take a title unless the owner signed it over. You forged my signature, I said, the reality of the crime finally clicking into place. You committed actual fraud to steal my property. Do not use words like fraud. Martha snapped, her sweet facade dropping. She stood up, slamming her hands on the table. We are your parents. We raised you. We put a roof over your head. When a member of this family is struggling to build a future, we all pitch in. Family comes first, Nora. I stared at her. I stared at the woman who had ignored every academic award I ever won, just to praise Stella for breathing correctly. I looked at my father, who was too much of a coward to defend his own daughter. And I looked at Stella, who was smirking, completely confident that I would just roll over and accept this, because I was the responsible one. I was always the one expected to take the hit. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't throw plates against the wall. The exhaustion from my flight completely vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating clarity. I pulled my shoulders back, looking directly into my mother's eyes. Enjoy your time in prison, I said. Those 5 words hit the room like a physical shockwave. Martha's face fell instantly, the color draining from her cheeks. Stella's smug smirk vanished. George finally looked up, his eyes wide with sudden terror. I didn't wait for their response. I turned on my heel, walked out the front door, and got back into my rental car. The war had officially begun. I barely slept that night. I checked into a generic hotel near the airport because I couldn't bear the thought of driving all the way downtown, only to drive back to the suburbs the next morning. At exactly 9 o'clock the following day, I pulled my rental car into the cracked asphalt parking lot of Victor's Auto Pawn. The place looked exactly how you would expect a high-end title loan shop to look, neon signs buzzing in the window, heavy iron bars over the glass, and an overarching smell of desperation and stale cigarette smoke. I walked inside, dressed in my sharpest tailored business suit. I needed to look like a woman who destroyed people for a living, not a victim. Behind the thick glass counter stood a heavy-set man in a tight polo shirt. The name tag pinned to his chest read Victor. He looked up from a racing magazine, eyeing me up and down. Can I help you? He asked, his voice rough like gravel. I am Nora, I said smoothly, sliding my driver's license under the glass partition. I am here regarding the 1972 Dodge Challenger brought in 5 days ago. I need to see the paperwork. Victor squinted at my ID, then typed something into his ancient computer. A few seconds later, he pulled a thick manila folder from a filing cabinet behind him. Right. Here it is. The vehicle was collateral for a $45,000 short-term cash loan. With our standard processing fees and the first month's interest, the buyout amount to release the vehicle is exactly $48,000. The deadline is 30 days from the date of the pawn. After that, we send it to a private auction. $48,000. They took out $45,000, and it was already going to cost $3,000 in pure predatory interest just to get it back. I need to see the title transfer document, I demanded, keeping my voice perfectly level. Victor raised an eyebrow but slid a photocopy of the title under the glass. I picked it up. My eyes scanned the page, stopping at the bottom right corner. There it was. My name, written in blue ink. It was a decent forgery, clearly practiced, probably by my mother. But it was completely wrong. The loop on the N was too wide, and the slant of the A leaned to the left instead of the right. It was a fake. This is not my signature, I stated plainly, tapping the paper. Victor leaned back, crossing his massive arms. Look, lady. I check IDs. The older gentleman and the blonde girl brought it in. They had the keys, they had the title, and they had a signed authorization letter. If you have a family dispute, take it up with them. Not my problem. It becomes your problem, I replied, reaching into my leather briefcase. I pulled out my passport and slapped it against the glass. I flipped it open to the pages filled with fresh custom stamps. Look at the dates. 5 days ago, when this transaction took place, I was physically standing inside a corporate office in London, England. I have flight records, hotel receipts, and 20 witnesses. I could not possibly have signed this document in your shop. Victor's smug expression faltered. The reality of handling stolen goods with forged federal documents started to dawn on him. I am not making a scene, I continued, lowering my voice to a sharp edge. But I need a copy of every single document in that folder, and I am formally requesting that you secure the security camera footage from that day. Because when the police arrive to investigate a felony title fraud, they are going to want to know exactly how a business like yours accepted a forged signature without the owner present. Victor didn't say another word. He turned around, placed the documents on the copy machine, and silently slid the copies under the glass. I took the papers, put them neatly into my briefcase, and walked out of the shop. I had the smoking gun. Now, I just needed to load it. I drove back to my downtown Chicago apartment. The silence of my living room usually brought me peace, but today it felt suffocating. I dropped my keys on the counter, walked straight into my home office, and opened the heavy steel safe hidden in my closet. I needed to pull my original birth certificate and social security card to prepare for the legal storm I was about to unleash. As I sifted through the thick stacks of important papers, my hand brushed against an old photo album I hadn't opened in years. I pulled it out and sat on the hardwood floor, flipping the heavy plastic pages. I didn't want to look at it, but my mind was violently forcing me to remember exactly why I was doing this. There was a photo of my 16th birthday. It was a picture of me sitting alone at the kitchen table with a single cupcake. My parents weren't in the photo because they were busy driving Stella across the state to a cheerleading competition. I flipped the page. There was a photo of Stella's 18th birthday. She was standing in the driveway, crying tears of joy next to a brand new, silver sedan with a massive red bow on the roof. When I turned 18, they handed me a set of cheap luggage and told me I was responsible for my own college tuition. They never hid their favoritism. Stella was outgoing, loud, and constantly demanded attention. I was quiet, studious, and self-sufficient. In their eyes, my independence meant I didn't need their love or their money. My grandpa Walter was the only one who saw through the family dynamic. He used to sit on the porch with me, slipping $20 bills into my pocket so I could buy books. Let them polish the brass, he used to tell me, referring to Stella. You are building the foundation. That Challenger was his foundation. And they stole it to fund Stella's delusions. My bitter walk down memory lane was shattered by the sudden, aggressive ringing of my cell phone. I looked at the caller ID. It was an unknown number with a New Jersey area code. I answered it cautiously. Is this Nora? A loud, angry male voice sparked through the speaker. Speaking. Who is this? My name is Tony. I run Apex Chemical Supply out of Newark. I am looking for Stella. She is dodging my calls, her email is bouncing back, and she owes me $12,000 for the industrial silicone binding agents we shipped her last month. She listed you as the primary financial guarantor on the vendor application. So, since she is playing hide and seek, I am collecting from you. I closed my eyes, taking a slow, deep breath. Stella hadn't just stolen my car. She had handed out my personal phone number and tried to use my pristine financial reputation to back her garbage business. Listen to me very carefully, Tony, I said, my voice dangerously calm. I have no legal affiliation with Stella's business. I did not sign any guarantor forms. If you have paperwork with my signature on it, it is a forgery, and I highly recommend you send it to my lawyer. Do not ever call this number again, or I will file harassment charges. I hung up the phone before he could scream another word. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from an overwhelming, white-hot rage. Stella's business wasn't just failing, it was a complete scam. She was drowning in debt, pissing off suppliers, and dragging my name into her mess. The $45,000 she got from my car was probably already gone, swallowed up by bad decisions and unpaid invoices. They really thought I was going to swoop in, play the responsible older sister, and clean up the mess. They were dead wrong. By 2 o'clock that afternoon, I was sitting in the sleek, glass-walled conference room of my lawyer's office. Diana was a corporate bulldog. I usually hired her firm to review the fine print on my company's corporate mergers, but she also handled private civil litigation. She sat across the polished mahogany table, carefully reading through the copies of the pawnshop documents I had handed her. Diana adjusted her glasses, her face completely expressionless. "Well, Nora, your family is incredibly stupid," she said flatly, setting the papers down. "This is a textbook case of felony fraud. The state of Illinois takes title fraud extremely seriously, especially when it involves vehicles valued over $10,000. "Tell me exactly what we are looking at," I said, leaning forward. "No sugarcoating." "All right," Diana replied, opening a legal pad. "First, we have identity theft. By forging your signature on a state document to secure a financial loan, they committed a Class 3 felony. Second, title fraud. Transferring ownership of a vehicle without the legal owner's consent. Both of these charges carry mandatory minimums. If you take this to the police and file a formal report, your parents are looking at 2 to 5 years in state prison, plus massive financial restitution. As for your sister, if she was present and facilitated the transaction, she can be charged as an accessory to fraud." Hearing the words "state prison" out loud hit me harder than I expected. A sudden wave of nausea rolled through my stomach. My throat tightened, and for a brief, terrifying second, I felt like throwing up. These were the people who raised me. I pictured my father, George, in a bright orange jumpsuit, his hands cuffed behind his back. The image made me sick. I wasn't a monster. I didn't want to destroy my own family. But then I pictured the empty garage. I remembered my mother looking me in the eye and telling me my property belonged to Stella. I remembered Tony from New Jersey screaming at me over the phone. If I didn't drop the hammer now, they would never stop. They would bleed me dry for the rest of my life. "I do not want to go to the police today," I told Diana, wiping a cold sweat from my palms. "I want to give them one chance to fix this themselves. But I need them to understand that I am holding a loaded gun." Diana nodded, understanding perfectly. "We play hardball. I will draft a formal cease and desist letter regarding your sister using your name for her vendors. More importantly, I will draft a highly detailed legal dossier outlining the exact penal codes they violated, the potential prison sentences, and a structured repayment contract." You hand them the dossier. You give them a deadline. If they do not pay off the pawnshop and return your car by that deadline, I file the police report automatically on your behalf. "Make the deadline 20 days, I said. Victor the pawnbroker had given me 30 days, but they had already burned 5. I needed a 5-day safety buffer just in case everything went to hell. 20 days to come up with $48,000, or they go to jail. Diana smiled, a sharp, predatory grin. "I will have the documents ready by tomorrow morning." I walked out of the law firm feeling 10 pounds lighter. The emotional chaos was gone, replaced by pure, cold strategy. The trap was set. If you're enjoying this story so far, please take a second to hit the like button on this video and subscribe to the channel. Also, drop a comment below with the name of the city you are living in. Every single comment helps the video spread to more amazing listeners. Thank you so much for your support. Day 10 of my 20-day deadline. The tension in my life was stretched so tight I felt like a piano wire ready to snap. I was back at my office downtown, buried under a mountain of paperwork trying to finalize the legal red tape for the London deal. I had deliberately ignored all texts and calls from my family for over a week. I wanted them to sit in the silence. I wanted them to sweat. Around 11 in the morning, my desk phone rang. It was an external call. I answered it, expecting a client. Instead, it was Mr. Franklin, the senior branch manager at the local bank where I had kept my primary savings account since I was 18 years old. "Nora, good morning. This is Mr. Franklin calling from the downtown branch. I apologize for interrupting your workday, but we have a slightly irregular situation here that requires your immediate verbal confirmation." I frowned, putting my pen down. "What kind of situation?" "Well," Mr. Franklin hesitated, his tone carefully professional. "Your parents, George and Martha, are currently sitting in my office. They're attempting to apply for a $30,000 expedited personal loan. However, their credit scores are not quite sufficient to secure an unsecured loan of this size. Your father presented a guarantor application, claiming that you agreed to co-sign the loan to back their credit. He said you were too busy at work to come in person, but that you had signed the pre-approval forms. The blood drained from my face, rushing straight to my feet. I stood up from my leather office chair, my knuckles turning white as I gripped the edge of my desk. They were doing it again. They were literally sitting in a bank, trying to take out $30,000 of debt and tying it to my pristine credit score without my permission. They were trying to use my own financial stability to pay me back for the car they stole from me. The sheer, unadulterated madness of it was staggering. Mr. Franklin, I said, my voice dropping an octave, radiating absolute fury. Listen to me very closely. I am not sitting in your office. I have not signed any pre-approval forms. I do not consent to being a guarantor on any loan for anyone. If my parents handed you a piece of paper with my signature on it, it is a forged document. I want you to reject that loan application immediately, and I want you to put a strict security freeze on all of my personal accounts requiring dual-factor authentication for any future inquiries. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. Mr. Franklin was a professional, but I could hear the subtle gasp of shock. Understood, Nora, he said quickly, his voice tight. I will shred the application immediately and secure your accounts. Have a good day. I hung up the phone and slumped back into my chair. My heart was hammering violently against my ribs. I rubbed my temples, trying to ward off a sudden, blinding headache. I had actually felt a tiny bit of guilt in the lawyer's office, wondering if I was being too harsh by threatening my own parents with prison. But that phone call killed every last ounce of sympathy I had left. They hadn't learned a single thing. They still viewed me as an unlimited resource, a safety net they could exploit whenever Stella's demands pushed them into a corner. They thought they could sneak behind my back, forge my name a second time, and use my money to fix their crime. It was time to stop playing games. It was time to show them exactly what happens when you push a financially independent, deeply exhausted woman past her breaking point. They had 10 days left on the clock, and I was about to drop a nuclear bomb on their perfectly crafted suburban illusion. For days after the bank incident, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was Stella. She was begging me to meet her at a small, independent coffee shop halfway between downtown and the suburbs. I almost ignored it, but morbid curiosity got the better of me. I wanted to look her in the eyes. I wanted to see if the reality of her actions had finally pierced her thick bubble of delusion. When I walked into the coffee shop, I almost didn't recognize her. The golden child, who usually refused to leave the house without full contouring and a designer handbag, was sitting in a corner booth wearing baggy gray sweatpants and a faded college hoodie. Her hair was pulled back into a messy bun, and she had dark, heavy bags under her eyes. She looked completely exhausted. I sat down across from her, not bothering to take off my coat or order a drink. I just stared at her, waiting. Stella nervously chewed on her lower lip. She reached down into a cheap canvas tote bag and pulled out a small, rectangular plastic pallet. She pushed it across the table toward me. My first shipment arrived yesterday, she whispered, her voice trembling. I looked down at the pallet. The clear plastic lid was cracked down the middle. Inside, the chemical compounds of the makeup had completely separated. There was a thick, chalky layer of pigment floating on top of a greasy, foul-smelling liquid. It looked like toxic sludge. Half the shipping containers were crushed in transit because I could not afford premium freight insurance, Stella continued, a tear finally spilling over her eyelashes. The supplier Tony used cheap binding agents. The formula separates after 2 hours at room temperature. It smells like sulfur. Customers who pre-ordered are already demanding chargebacks on their credit cards. 2 people have threatened to report me to the health department for chemical burns. I didn't feel sorry for her. I felt a cold, clinical validation. And let me guess, I said flatly. You have no contingency fund. No liability insurance. No quality control protocols. Stella buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. I just wanted to prove I could be successful too. Everyone always talks about how smart you are, how rich you are. I wanted to be the boss. But everything is falling apart. Nora, I need $10,000. Just $10,000. If I can refund the angry customers and pay Tony to reformulate the next batch, I can save the business. I promise I will pay you back every cent. The audacity was almost breathtaking. Even sitting in the ruins of her own catastrophic failure, her instinct was still to ask me to fund it. Show me your business plan, I demanded. Stella looked up confused. What? Your business plan? Your financial projections for the next 3 quarters. Your customer acquisition cost analysis. The legally binding contracts you signed with your chemical suppliers. Show them to me. She fidgeted with the sleeves of her hoodie. It is not like that, Nora. It is a creative industry. It is more fluid. I have a mood board for the branding and a list of influencers I was going to send free PR packages to. I let out a harsh, bitter laugh. You do not have a business, Stella. You have an expensive, delusional hobby. You used my car, my grandfather's legacy, to buy toxic sludge from a discount warehouse in New Jersey. And now you are sitting here asking me to throw $10,000 into a dumpster fire. Please, she sobbed loudly, not caring that people at the surrounding tables were staring. I am drowning. Then learn how to swim, I said coldly. I stood up from the table, looking down at my crying sister. Because I am not throwing you a life preserver. Not a single penny, Stella. You fix this mess yourself. I turned and walked out of the coffee shop, leaving her sobbing into her hands. The empire of the golden child was officially crumbling, and I was not going to let it crush me on the way down. Day 16 of the deadline. The pawnshop clock was ticking down, and my family was entirely out of moves. I sent a single text message to a group chat containing George, Martha, and Stella. It read, kitchen table. Tonight at 7. Mandatory. I didn't drive out to the suburbs alone. I picked up my Uncle Harrison on the way. Uncle Harrison was my father's older brother, a retired high school principal with a booming voice and zero tolerance for nonsense. He was the only person in the family who had consistently called out my parents' toxic favoritism over the years. When I told him what they had done to my car, he was so angry he nearly punched a hole in his own drywall. I needed him there as a neutral witness. When we walked through the front door, the atmosphere in the house was suffocating. The smell of anxiety was thick in the air. George, Martha, and Stella were already sitting at the kitchen table, looking like prisoners waiting for a firing squad. Hello, Harrison, my father mumbled, his eyes darting nervously to my uncle. Save the pleasantries, George, Uncle Harrison barked, pulling out a chair and sitting down heavily. I am here because someone needs to speak for the daughter you decided to throw under the bus. I remained standing. I unclasped my leather briefcase and pulled out 3 thick, bound legal dossiers prepared by my lawyer, Diana. I tossed them onto the center of the oak table. They landed with a heavy, satisfying thud. We're out of time, and we're out of options, I said, my voice projecting clearly across the room. I know about the failed bank loan. I know about the toxic makeup. You have zero capital, and the car goes to a public auction in exactly 4 days. Martha reached a trembling hand toward the legal dossier. What is this, Nora? That is your future, I replied. Open it to page 3. Go ahead, read it out loud. Martha flipped the heavy paper open. Her eyes scanned the text, and her face drained of all color. Illinois Penal Code. Class 3 felony. Identity theft. Fraudulent transfer of a motor vehicle title. She choked on the words, covering her mouth with her hand. 2 to 5 years, I said, leaning over the table, making sure my father was looking right into my eyes. That is the mandatory state minimum for forging a signature to secure a financial loan. No probation. No suspended sentences. Actual, physical state prison. You wouldn't, George whispered, his voice cracking. We are your family. You lost the right to use that word the second you stole from me, I shot back, the anger finally bleeding into my voice. You stole a $45,000 asset to fund lip gloss. You tried to ruin my credit score to cover your tracks. You have exactly 4 days to put $48,000 into my checking account. If you miss that deadline by a single minute, my lawyer will automatically file this dossier with the state police. Stella completely broke down. She slid out of her chair, falling to her knees on the kitchen floor, sobbing hysterically. "It is my fault. It is all my fault. Do not send them to jail, Nora. Please." For the first time in my life, I saw genuine, raw remorse on my father's face. It wasn't just the fear of getting caught. It was the crushing realization of exactly what he had done to his own child. He reached out and grabbed his wife's hand. He looked at me, tears welling up in his tired eyes. "What do we do?" George asked, his voice entirely broken. "We do not have the money. We do not have anything left." "Figure it out," Uncle Harrison interrupted, slamming his hand on the table. "Sell your things. Get second jobs. Bleed for it, George. Just like Nora bled for years to buy that car while you completely ignored her." I zipped up my briefcase. The terms were set. The legal threat was real, and it was terrifying. I walked out of the house with Uncle Harrison, leaving the sound of my mother's ragged, ugly sobs echoing in the kitchen. Day 18. The reality of the deadline had finally crushed Stella's pride into dust. Through a mutual friend, I heard about Stella's desperate attempts to liquidate everything she owned. I actually drove past a luxury consignment boutique downtown and parked across the street just to watch it happen. Through the large glass windows, I saw the golden child standing at the counter. She was violently emptying her closet. She laid out her prized possessions, 3 pristine Chanel handbags, a vintage Rolex watch our parents had bought her for college graduation, and a dozen Hermes silk scarves. These were the items she used to flaunt at family gatherings, the armor she wore to prove she was better than everyone else. I watched as the boutique owner examined the items with a magnifying glass, shaking her head. Designer items lose value the second they leave the store. The boutique owner punched some numbers into a calculator and pushed it across the counter. Even from across the street, I could see Stella's shoulders physically slump. She was getting pennies on the dollar. She argued, waving her arms, but the owner simply shrugged and pointed to the door. Defeated, Stella signed the paperwork and walked out with a small cashier's check. Later that same week, my coworker Monica sent me a picture message. Monica had been shopping at a mid-tier department store in a suburban mall. The picture was of Stella. She was wearing a cheap, polyester employee uniform, a plastic name tag pinned to her chest. She was standing behind a cash register, aggressively scrubbing a spilled iced coffee off the counter while a middle-aged customer yelled at her. Stella, the girl who refused to get a summer job in high school because the lighting in the mall was bad for her skin, was now working a minimum wage retail shift. That night, Stella called me. I let it ring 3 times before answering. "I sold my bags," she said, her voice hollow and defeated. "I sold the watch. I sold everything in my closet that had a label. I got $8,000. I wired it to your account." "Received," I replied coldly. "I worked an 8-hour shift today on my feet," she continued, her voice breaking. "People treat you like absolute garbage. They look right through you like you are a piece of furniture." I leaned against my kitchen counter, looking out at the city lights. "Welcome to the real world, Stella. The world where you actually have to earn your money instead of demanding it. All those times I called you boring because you stayed home to study, or canceled plans because you had to work late," Stella whispered. "You were not being boring. You were just being responsible. I had no idea how hard it was." I didn't offer her comfort. I didn't tell her it was going to be okay. I just hung up the phone. It was a hard lesson, but it was a necessary one. $8,000 down. 40,000 to go. Day 19. 24 hours before the absolute deadline. The pressure inside my parents' house had reached a boiling point. My father, George, was 60 years old and suffered from severe arthritis in his knees. For the past 20 years, he had worked a comfortable, mid-level desk job. But with the threat of state prison hanging over his head, pride was no longer a luxury he could afford. Uncle Harrison called me to give me the update. George had gone to a local logistics warehouse and begged the manager for a job on the graveyard shift. He was working from midnight to 8 in the morning, physically loading heavy cardboard boxes onto freight trucks just to earn the overnight differential pay. Harrison told me George could barely walk up the porch steps when he got home, his knees popping and grinding with every step. Meanwhile, my mother was facing her own reckoning. Martha was a woman deeply obsessed with appearances and family heritage. But appearances cannot keep you out of a jail cell. Martha packed up all the antique silver candlesticks she had inherited from her grandmother, items that had survived the Great Depression. She added her pearl anniversary necklace, her diamond earrings, and the expensive china set she only brought out for Thanksgiving. She drove to a different pawn shop across town, weeping silently in the car as she traded her family's history for a stack of $100 bills. The collateral damage of their desperation began to ripple through the extended family. My phone rang, displaying the caller ID of Aunt Brenda, my mother's younger sister and a notorious gossip. "You're a monster, Nora." Aunt Brenda screamed through the speaker the second I answered. "Your mother is having a nervous breakdown. Your father is destroying his joints in a warehouse. How can you torture your own flesh and blood like this over a stupid piece of metal?" I didn't even flinch. "That stupid piece of metal is worth nearly $50,000, Brenda. They committed felony fraud. If you feel so strongly about family loyalty, why don't you write them a check to keep them out of prison?" Brenda stuttered, completely caught off guard. I do not have that kind of money. That is not the point." "Then stay out of my business," I said, and ended the call. I opened my banking app on my phone and refreshed the balance. The money was trickling in, agonizingly slow. $8,000 from Stella's designer bags. $5,000 from Martha's antique silver. A few thousand scraped from George's drained retirement savings. I ran the final calculation. They had managed to liquidate $44,000 in less than 20 days. It was an impressive, desperate feat, but math does not care about effort. They were still exactly $4,000 short. And the clock was about to strike midnight. Day 20. The deadline day. I woke up at 6 in the morning to a frantic phone call from George. He was crying. Actual, heavy, hyperventilating tears. "Nora, please," he begged, the sound of his weeping sending a sharp pang through my chest. "We are $4,000 short. We sold everything. I maxed out the credit cards. The bank will not approve another advance. We just need 2 more days. Please do not call the police." Before I could answer, my other line beeped. It was a call from Victor, the owner of the pawn shop. I put my father on hold and switched over. "Hey, lady," Victor said, his rough voice completely devoid of sympathy. "It is the 30th day on my end. I got a private buyer from a classic car club looking at the Challenger right now. He is offering cash. If I do not have $48,000 in my account by 12 noon today, the car is gone. Permanently." Panic, cold and sharp, flooded my veins. The punishment was supposed to be about teaching my family a lesson, not actually losing my grandfather's legacy. If Victor sold that car to a private cash buyer, I would never see it again. "Do not sign anything," I barked at Victor. "The money will be there by noon." I switched back to my father. "You have until noon, Dad, or the car is gone forever." At 11:15, I was sitting in my office, staring at my bank screen, my finger hovering over the contact for my lawyer, Diana. I was preparing to pull the trigger and file the police report. The tension was unbearable. Suddenly, my office door swung open. Uncle Harrison walked in, wearing his heavy winter coat, holding a small slip of paper in his hand. He looked exhausted but determined. "I just came from the bank," Uncle Harrison said, tossing the paper onto my desk. I picked it up. It was a wire transfer confirmation. $4,000, deposited directly into my account. "You paid it?" I asked, completely stunned. "I loaned it to George," Harrison corrected, sitting down heavily in the chair opposite my desk. "I drafted a legal contract this morning. George will repay me every single penny from his warehouse paychecks. I am not giving them a free pass. But I am not going to let you lose Walter's car because your father is an idiot." I looked at the total balance on my screen. $48,000. Exactly. A massive, overwhelming wave of relief crashed over me. My hands started to shake, and I realized I had been holding my breath for nearly 3 weeks. We did it. The money was secured. Thank you, Uncle Harrison, I whispered, my voice cracking with emotion. Do not thank me, he said, offering a tight, proud smile. Go get your car. I grabbed my coat, practically sprinting out of the office. At exactly 11:45, 15 minutes before the absolute deadline, I authorized the wire transfer to Victor's auto pawn. The nightmare was finally ending. The sun was high in the sky when I pulled my rental car into the cracked parking lot of Victor's auto pawn. I didn't wear a sharp business suit this time. I wore a simple leather jacket and jeans. I didn't need to look intimidating anymore. I had already won the war. I pushed through the heavy glass door. Victor was sitting behind the counter, counting a stack of receipts. He looked up, his expression sour. Wire transfer cleared, he grunted, sliding a thick manila folder under the glass partition. $48,000. The title is clear, and the lien is removed. Sign the release. I took the pen. My hand was completely steady this time. I signed my name perfectly, the loop of the N narrow, the A slanting precisely to the right. Victor verified the signature, grunted again, and dropped a heavy set of keys into my palm. Car is out back, he said, turning back to his magazines. I walked out the side door into the fenced-in holding lot. And there she was. The glossy black paint, the flawless chrome bumper, the sleek, aggressive lines of the 1972 Challenger. She looked exactly the same as the day I left for London. I ran my hand along the cool metal of the hood, feeling for any scratches or dents, but she was perfect. I unlocked the door and slid into the driver's seat. The smell of old leather and gasoline hit me instantly. It was the scent of my childhood. I put the key in the ignition and turned it. The engine roared to life, a deep, vibrating rumble that shook the steering wheel and echoed off the brick walls of the alley. I should have felt purely triumphant. I should have been cheering. But as I pulled out of the pawnshop lot and merged onto the highway, the victory tasted incredibly complex. I had my car back, but the illusion of my family was permanently shattered. The blind trust one used to have, the naive hope that maybe one day they would love me as much as they loved Stella, was gone forever. It had been burned away by the reality of what they were willing to do to me. I didn't drive the car back to the suburbs. I had spent the previous week scouting locations downtown. I drove straight into a highly secure, climate-controlled, underground parking facility near my apartment complex. I had leased a private spot with 24-hour surveillance and an iron gate. I parked the Challenger, killed the engine, and stepped out into the quiet garage. I locked the car and put the keys deep into my pocket. My property would never, ever be stored under their roof again. The physical distance between my car and their house was the perfect metaphor for the new boundary I was establishing. 1 week after retrieving the Challenger, I drove my daily commuter car out to the suburbs. I was not alone. I brought Diana, my corporate lawyer, with me. We walked into my parents' house and sat down at the exact same oak kitchen table where this entire nightmare had begun. George, Martha, and Stella were sitting across from us. The arrogant, dismissive attitude they had displayed a month ago was completely gone. They looked broken, humbled, and terrified. Diana opened her briefcase and pulled out a stack of legally binding documents. She slid them across the table. "This is a formal repayment contract," I explained, my voice calm and professional. "Uncle Harrison fronted $4,000 to save you from missing the deadline. You also owe me for the legal fees I incurred hiring Diana, the cost of my rental car, and the emotional distress damages you caused by stealing my identity. The total remaining debt is exactly $7,500. George stared at the paperwork, his eyes tired. "Nora, we have nothing left." "I know," I replied. "Which is why this contract stipulates a monthly payment plan. $300 a month, automatically garnished from the warehouse paychecks and Stella's retail wages, deposited directly into my account until the balance is paid in full. If a single payment is missed by more than 48 hours, the contract authorizes a civil lawsuit for wage garnishment." Martha looked at me, tears silently streaming down her face. "You really brought a lawyer to your own mother's house?" "You brought a forged title to a pawnshop," I shot back smoothly. Respect has to be enforced when it is not freely given. Sign the papers. George picked up the pen without another word. His hand shook, but he signed his name on the dotted line. Martha followed. Then it was Stella's turn. She picked up the pen, staring at the legal jargon. She looked drastically different. The expensive hair extensions were gone. Her nails were unpainted and chipped from working the cash register. "I am sorry," Stella whispered, looking up at me. It wasn't the manipulative, whining apology she used when she wanted money. It was quiet. It was real. "I always thought you were just lucky. I thought success was something that just happened to you, and I deserved it too. But working these 8-hour shifts, getting yelled at for minimum wage. I finally get it. You earned everything you have. And I stole it." She signed the paper and pushed it back across the table. I looked at the 3 signatures. The power dynamic in this family had officially shifted. I was no longer the quiet, reliable safety net they could abuse. I was the one holding the pen. I took the contracts, put them in my briefcase, and walked out the door. 1 year later, the mountain curves of the Colorado highway unfolded ahead of me like a ribbon of dark asphalt. I downshifted, feeling the Challenger respond immediately. The heavy rumble of the engine vibrated through the steering wheel and into my bones. The morning sun painted the towering pine trees in gold, and the cool mountain air rushed through the open windows, tangling my hair. For the first time since I was a little girl sitting in Grandpa Walter's garage, I was truly, completely enjoying the ride. The knot of tension that had lived between my shoulder blades for my entire adult life was finally gone. Setting ironclad boundaries had cost me the fantasy of perfect family harmony, but it had given me something infinitely better: authentic peace. Things with my family were not perfect, and they probably never would be. We didn't have big, laughing Sunday dinners. But there was a new, undeniable respect. The monthly payments of $300 hit my bank account like clockwork. My father was still working part-time at the warehouse, finally understanding the value of hard labor. Stella was still working retail, living in a tiny studio apartment, and, surprisingly, she had started taking night classes at the community college for accounting. She was learning how to build a foundation. I eased off the gas pedal as a sharp curve approached, then accelerated smoothly through the turn. The engine sang beneath me. Yesterday, I had volunteered at a local community center, giving a financial literacy seminar to a group of young, disadvantaged women. After the class, a 17-year-old girl named Maya lingered behind. She had followed me out to the parking lot, her eyes wide with amazement when she saw the black Challenger parked by the curb. "My dad used to love cars like this," Maya had told me, running her hand respectfully over the chrome bumper. "But my family always made him sell his tools to pay for my brother's legal fees. They always said family comes first." I had looked at Maya, seeing so much of my younger self in her eyes. I unlocked the door and let her sit in the driver's seat. I watched her grip the steering wheel, her face lighting up with a sudden sense of possibility. "Dreams need protecting, Maya," I told her, leaning against the doorframe. "People will try to use the word family as a weapon to make you feel guilty for having things they do not have. But sacrifice is only beautiful when it is a choice. When it is demanded from you, it is just theft. Never let anyone, not even your parents, steal your foundation." She had nodded, understanding the weight of the lesson. Now, cruising at 60 miles per hour down the open highway, I patted the leather dashboard. "We did good, Grandpa," I whispered into the rushing wind. I pressed my foot down on the gas pedal. The engine roared, a magnificent, defiant sound echoing off the canyon walls. The road stretched out endlessly before me, unmarked by guilt, obligation, or toxic expectations. It was just me, the chrome, and the absolute freedom of the open road. So, Reddit, am I wrong for threatening my own family with prison and forcing them to work graveyard shifts to get my car back, or did they get exactly what they deserved for crossing the line? If you enjoyed this story, please take a second to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps the algorithm, and I upload new, crazy stories every single day. Let me know your verdict in the comments below, and I will see you in the next video.